On August 14, 2005, a Boeing 737 of Helios Airlines was preparing to take off at the airport. The aircraft number was 5BDBY, and it was a new aircraft that had been in use for less than 10 years. The flight number was ZU522. Helios Airlines was founded in Cyprus and has roots in Europe and North Africa. Since its establishment in 1999, the company has never had a major accident. The captain and the co-pilot were in the cockpit. However, the co-pilot had a bad habit of completing the checklist hastily. It was this bad habit that will be the fuse of this story. This flight carried 115 passengers and 6 crew members. One of the flight attendants was Sherwin, who was 25 years old at the time. He had received flight training and had a commercial pilot license issued by the UK. Generally, flight licenses are divided into SPL, PPL, Corporal and ATPL, which correspond to training licenses, private licenses, commercial licenses and airline transport licenses, and share ANS commercial pilot license, in some countries, can even be used to apply for a pilot directly, and in this story, he in the incident will play a crucial role. Flight 522 departed from Cyprus, stopped in Greece, and finally arrived in Prague, Czech Republic, during the regular inspection of the aircraft. The crew wrote in the maintenance record that there was a problem with the right rear cabin door, so the engineer came to check, which may involve the aircraft's cabin pressure system, and the cabin pressure system of this aircraft had problems before, such as oxygen masks falling off during flight. The engineer decided to do a visual inspection of the cabin door and a cabin pressure inspection. At 1 a.m. on August the 14th, 2 engineers were operating the rear door inside the plane, and another was outside to confirm the source of the sound. After confirming that the door was in the normal position, an engineer came to the cockpit to pressurize the plane. The whole process required manual control, so the engineer switched the cockpit cabin pressure system switch from automatic to manual. At 3 a.m. after completing a series of checks, the engineers did not find any cabin pressure leakage. However, when the engineers left the plane, they forgot to switch the cabin pressure controller back to automatic mode. The plane took off at 6:07 and the crew confirmed the final checklist. One of the items was to check the cabin pressure switch. Under normal circumstances, the crew would set the cruising altitude for the entire journey before the plane took off, and then switch the cabin pressure switch to automatic mode. In this way, the plane would automatically adjust the cabin pressure according to the altitude. Because the plane driven by the crew was basically fixed, no one usually touched this switch, and it was also easy to be overlooked. 4 minutes after takeoff, at 6:11 in the morning, the crew reported their position to the control center. However, this was the first time that Flight 522 had been in contact with the control center. This will be the last call between the crew and air traffic control, because what will happen next is something that is enough to shock the world. 1 minute later, the plane climbed to 3,700 meters. At this time, the cabin pressure warning sounded. This is actually a very serious fault, because the air is thinner as it goes higher. According to normal procedures, the pilot will first put on an oxygen mask, and then let the plane descend to increase the oxygen density in the cabin. However, the actual situation is that the plane is still rising, because the captain mistook the cabin pressure warning for a takeoff status warning. When the aircraft does not perform properly in some places, the system will issue a prompt, but the warning sound is the same. Is there no visual prompt? In Boeing's new aircraft, if there is a problem with cabin pressure, a red light will light up in a prominent position on the panel and indicate what the problem is. But this aircraft has not yet installed this system, and the takeoff status warning will only sound when on the ground. So when the captain thought it was a malfunction in this area, he himself was even puzzled. When the aircraft reached an altitude of 4,300 meters, the pilot the main warning in the cabin sounded, and the instrument showed that the cabin began to supply oxygen, which meant that the oxygen masks above the passenger seats were lowered. This could provide 12 minutes of use for all passengers on the plane. The instrument also showed that the cooling system was shut down. The cooling system was shut down because the cabin was not pressurized, which resulted in insufficient air density in the cabin. Although the panel did not clearly indicate a cabin pressure failure, the oxygen masks were lowered and the cooling system was shut down. This was all caused by insufficient pressure. However, the 2 pilots still did not think about the cabin pressure failure. At 6:14 a.m., the plane reached an altitude of 4,800 meters. The captain contacted the airline and reported 2 faults, namely the takeoff status warning and the cooling system shutdown. The captain asked the engineer on duty where the fuse of the cooling system was. The engineer said it was behind the captain's seat, so the captain got up to find the fuse of the cooling system. After a while, the engineer suggested that the captain check the cabin pressure controller. However, the captain did not answer this question, but continued to ask about the cooling system. After being interrupted, the engineer did not continue to ask. At 6:20 in the morning, the plane reached an altitude of 8,800 meters. The captain ended the call with the engineer. At 6:23 in the morning, the plane was flying at an altitude of 10,000 meters, at 6:26 in the morning, 12 minutes after the oxygen masks were lowered. The plane stopped supplying oxygen. At 6:29 in the morning, Helios Airlines contacted the area control, asking if they could contact the plane. After 6:30 a.m. the area control used its own frequency and other planes in the sky to contact Flight 522, but received no response. At 6:36 am, the plane officially entered the Athens control area. At 7:12 am, the plane was 140 kilometers away from the airport. According to the original plan, the plane should be ready to descend at this time, but the crew did not report to the area control. The Athens area control finally realized that something seemed wrong, so they called the plane through the emergency frequency, but received no response. Other planes used various methods to call Helios 522, but received no response. At 7:15 am, the plane flew according to the preset approach route, but the plane's altitude was still 10,000 meters, because the plane's descent required manual control by the pilot. At 7:16 am, Athens Air Traffic Control announced that it had lost contact with the plane. At 7:29 am, the plane flew at an altitude of 10,000 meters. The airport computer automatically determined that the plane had missed the approach, and then entered the missed approach route. At 7:37 in the morning, the plane entered a circling state. At this time, two F-16 fighters of the Greek Air Force took off. The fighters called through the emergency frequency, and after aerobatic maneuvers, the passenger plane did not respond, so one of the fighters prepared to get closer for observation. He was surprised to find that the captain's seat was empty, and there was a collapsed person in the co-pilot's seat. In the cabin, there were several passengers wearing oxygen masks, but they sat quietly in their chairs, and did not respond to the fighter planes that appeared outside the window. Nearly 20 minutes passed quietly. At 8:48 in the morning, a man in light blue clothes walked into the cockpit and tried to control the plane. This man was the flight attendant mentioned above, Xiao, and was able to hold on until now because he used a spare oxygen bottle. But although he had received flight training and had a commercial pilot's license, he did not know how to fly this huge Boeing 737. 1 minute later, at the left engine of the plane shut down. It was not known whether it was due to thrust imbalance or Xiao An's deliberate action. The plane began to sail to the left. Two F-16 fighter jets quickly pulled away and just followed far behind. The plane finally began to descend. At this time, the left engine shut down. 5 minutes later, the recorder recorded someone saying "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday, Helios Airlines Flight 522. Perhaps because Xiao An did not know how to use this plane, the distress signal was not sent out. At 8:56 in the morning, the autopilot was disconnected. At 8:59 in the morning, when the plane descended to 2,600 meters, the cabin pressure warning finally stopped, but the passengers and the captain had already fainted due to lack of oxygen. When the plane descended to 2,100 meters, Xiao An saw the fighter jet and gestured to it. The fighter pilot responded with a gesture to follow me. At this time, the right engine of the plane also shut down. The plane left the ground with its tail first and crashed heavily on a hill 33 kilometers away from the airport. It stopped after rolling for more than 500 meters. Except for the relatively intact tail section, the rest of the plane was blown into pieces. The accident also caused a forest fire. The entire land was scorched. In order to put out the fire and rescue the victims, the police dispatched 35 fire trucks, 3 helicopters and 8 firefighting planes, but all the passengers on board were killed. Afterwards, the pilot of the fighter plane said that, actually in the final stage, Xiao An tried to pull up the joystick to lift the plane up, to reduce the impact force. The Accident Investigation Committee is now the field, found the spare oxygen cylinder. They speculated that it was because Xiao An used the spare oxygen that he was able to hold on for 2 more hours, and the main reason for the crash was that, after the ground engineer checked the plane, he forgot to change the manual mode of the cabin pressure system to the automatic mode, and the crew did not find it during the re-inspection. When the cabin pressure alarm sounded, the crew mistook the fault, and thus missed the opportunity to descend, causing all the crew to be deprived of oxygen and lose consciousness. Although Xiao An relied on the spare oxygen, he barely maintained consciousness, and pried open the cockpit door. The plane stayed in the air for too long, and the fuel was exhausted, which led to the crash. Although the survival rate of passengers in air crashes is very low, but in terms of probability, aircraft rarely have major accidents. The probability of a multiple casualty accident is about 1 in 3 million, so airplanes are still a safe means of transportation. See you next time.